It's Not a Boy. Chapter 1. Victorious Day. Not long now, they said. Don't give up. You can do it. There's light at the end of the tunnel. But the pain had seemed to go on forever, and Mam said it was hard to believe that it would ever end. Then suddenly it did. They had laboured and hoped for this, and in the morning there was peace. World War II was over, and to the sound of cheerings, my mother's labours had also finished, and I was about to be born with my very own war about to begin. I didn't know anything about the darkness that had gone before, but they told me later. I didn't know about the first bomb that dropped in our paddock, leaving a black, hollow, burnt-out tree. I never knew about the soldiers making a concrete base for their guns in a field called Far Side. I didn't know about the air raid shelter that was made with straw bales. I never had to run there when the warning sounded. I didn't hear the man on his bike with his old-fashioned carbide dripping lamp pedalling furiously from Ringham to our village. "They're out! They're out!" he shouted, and that meant that the bomber aeroplanes were out to get everybody. Those were the black days, but that morning I slithered out into a victorious day. The darkness had gone at last, and I blinked in the light welcoming me. I was in my mum's arms in my Auntie Martha's bed at her house at Ringham, and I was safe. "She's out! She's out!" The news would go round all our villages, but it was not shouted by our man on the bike, because I learnt that he only liked bad news. My two little sisters, Katie and Gwendy, climbed the stairs to come and see me. So there we all were, my mother and her 3 little daughters. Auntie Martha sat on the edge of her bed with my mam, and they listened to the wireless. "Today is Victory in Europe Day." Everybody had worked so hard to bring victory, and lots of people like Auntie Martha had prayed. They all cheered, and Mam named me Victoria. I was named after a victorious day. We stayed at Auntie Martha's for 2 weeks, but my dad didn't have much time to come and see us because he was always busy on our farm. He was always looking after his animals. "God helps them that helps themselves" was one of his sayings, and he believed it. My Auntie Martha believed in prayer, but Dad believed in hard labour. Our farm was our livelihood, and now he had another little girl to look after. He had to work even harder. Nothing was ever said, of course, but my dad must have wanted a baby boy. You just knew that he would have wanted a boy. He was a farmer, and he had a farm to look after, and he needed a boy to work for him and take over when he was older. Now he had 3 girls and no one to help. So you could say that a second sort of bomb had dropped with my birth, even though the war had ended. There was no boy, no son for my dad. 3rd-time baby, not lucky. Mam told me that when I was 2 weeks old, in between feeding his sheep and sorting his lambs for market, my dad came to pick me up in his little black car. Mam sat in front with me snuggled against her, wrapped in my grey army blanket. My sisters sat in the back, and we chugged from Ringham to our little village called Gumbalding, Gum for short. We went down our lane, and I was carried into our house for the first time. There was a fire roaring in the grate, and I was put down on our couch. I looked at the flames from the fire, and Grandma from next door came to see me. and she put the kettle on. Then they all sat down for a mug of tea. This was my home. This was where I would be safe, and this was where I would grow up. I soon fitted in to my Mum and Dad's routine, and it was as if I'd always been there. Mum and Dad got up early. Mum lit the fire as she always did. Dad had a mug of tea and then went out to look after his animals on our farm, as he always did. Then our Katie went on the school bus and Gwendy stayed at home with me and played. Everything went on as it always had, and everything seemed safe. But it was not safe, because believe it or not, a third sort of bomb dropped on our family. This was even worse than the one that killed the tree, and worse than me not being a boy. I can't remember anything about all this, of course, but they told me later. When I started to cut my teeth, I got fretful and grizzly, and Mum rubbed some teething powder on my gums and I settled down again. That was when this third bomb dropped. Third time was not lucky again, because something very dangerous happened to me, and nobody knew what it was. Something went wrong, and I lay on the hard couch in pain, staring unseeingly, and everybody tiptoed around, and nobody knew what to do. My arms and legs stopped working. I couldn't kick about like I used to, and I couldn't wave my hands and put my fist in my mouth to ease the pain on my gums. I couldn't smile or laugh. I couldn't do anything. I didn't even want to eat. And as time went by, I didn't learn to sit up or walk like my little sisters had done. There was a dark shadow hanging over us. It hung over us all again, just like in the war, and nobody could see the light at the end of the tunnel this time. Of course, my mum had to get on with looking after us all as best she could. But she was always needed outside on the farm, and she was always sewing to make our clothes and save money. In between time, she took care of me and tried to keep our house clean, and just as clean as she could. She washed and brushed the stone floor while I lay on the hard couch with my grey blanket over me, and I did nothing except moan. She picked me up and I just flopped in her arms with my mouth open unseeingly. They'd secretly begun to think that I was wrong in their head. "She seems as daft as a brush," said Dad one day, saying what everybody else hadn't wanted to see. I was growing up, and I should have been able to do all the things that my sisters did by now, but I couldn't do anything. I needed some help, and Auntie Martha prayed for me. Please help her, God. But my dad believed in his saying about God helping them that helps themselves, and he knew he had to do something. So he called for Dr. Moon from Ringham, but the doctor just shook his head. He didn't know what was wrong. He'd never seen anything like me. My mum and dad did not know what else to do. Lambing time was coming up again, and Dad would be sitting up all night and needed Mum's help. But Mum had to look after me, and I couldn't be left. There must be something more that could be done. Then my dad decided that there was something else he could try. He was going to get a second opinion. First, he drew what little savings he had out of the bank. Then Mum wrapped me in the grey blanket and off we went in our little car. But this time we went to Hull, where there was a specialist doctor who trained down south. where they had more experts than they had here in the north. It was all very posh. My dad said that they walked over thick carpets in a special hospital. I was a flop of flesh in my mum's arms. Dad wore his funeral suit, black and rough. Mum wore her navy suit that she had made herself from an old coat that she had turned to make it look new. But they needn't have bothered, because the posh doctor didn't look up. He was in his soft grey suit and kept on looking down at his notes. My sad dad handed over the precious pound notes. It was so much money that he could have had another farm hand for that to help with lambing. "What do you want to know?" said the posh man, as his voice floated softly over the leather chairs. And Dad told me that it went over bright silk cushions and deep carpets and up to us three, all huddled together on a squashy sofa. "Is she daft?" they asked him. Our brush wasn't mentioned this time. "She's perfectly normal. Mentally." He glanced up for a minute, and then he started to write on his notepad in his lily-white hands. He sighed a smooth sigh. "Well, what's up with her then?" my dad burst out. His scrubbed red hands and his dirt-blackened nails pulled at his shirt's collar. "He means what's wrong with her then," corrected Mam. She was always correcting his Yorkshire accent and his way of speaking. She wanted us girls to speak properly because we wouldn't have a job. We couldn't work on the farm like boys, and we would have to be good at other things and get on in the world. "It's probably a rare form of poisoning." The posh private doctor spoke quietly, but at the word poisoning, a shot rang out. My mam jumped and her hold on me slackened and she nearly dropped me on the carpet. "Poisoning? What poison?" "The poisoning was probably from teething powder. It's been withdrawn from the market now." That's all he said about my condition. Maybe the money was used up, and if the doctor had said more, Dad thought that he would have had to pay more. Suddenly Mam started to cry, but it was not the money that she was worried about. "Will she live? Will she live?" said Mam, and her body crumpled down, squashing me between her bust and her knees. "Maybe she will live, maybe she won't. In any case, there is nothing that the medical profession can do now, so you must take her home." "But how will I look after her?" "You must do your best. It will be hard work." And he looked at my mother over the top of his gold-rimmed glasses. "You could always pray for her, of course." And then he turned away and started to look at the next person's notes.